So I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock on August 29th. If everyone would stand, we'll start with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good evening to everyone that's here tonight. We've got a full slate, so we'll try to clip along. My name is Dan Burke. I am the Planning Commission Chair, and I'll allow my commissioners to the left to introduce themselves.
Jacob Gibbs. Tim Allen.
Andy Owens.
Michael Whitmer. There is a sign-in sheet in the back, and there's also agendas. And then the first thing is the approval of the minutes for the June 20th meeting. So hoping everyone had a chance to read those. I'm looking for a motion for approval.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
And moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 5-0. All right, the first item on the agenda is Planning Department file number 24027. It's Douglas County Land Department request for a zone change from PR Public Reserve to 5R Rural Residential 5 on a property located south of State Highway 38 and abutting the Umpqua River on the south with rural community of Scottsburg. So first thing, I'll poll the commissioners if we have any conflict of interest or ex parte contacts or any site visits. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this or, okay? Anyone opposed? Okay. Anyone neutral? Okay. So first thing up, we will ask the staff to come up for the staff report.
So could we go ahead and clarify for the record and have each party identify themselves for the record? If they could come up to the podium and
State your name and your
state,
address.
yes, name and address, please.
So those in
So-
favor, if you could come forward and state your name. I'm out of practice a little bit here.
Tony Page, Land Director, in favor of this proposal, and it's 1036 Southeast Douglas.
Okay.
Roseburg.
Thank you. Okay. Those that are not in favor? Opposed?
Steve and Bobby Slayton, 317 Main Street, Scottsburg, directly across from this parcel.
Thank you. And there was no,
Is
if you'd like to speak, you can come up too.
he just said nothing from me. Okay.
And there was no one neutral, correct? Okay. All right. There we are. Yeah. So now for the staff report.
Thank you. All right, so this meeting was originally scheduled for July, but due to a lack of quorum, it was postponed. So I have the original staff exhibits 1 through 14 to submit into the record, as well as an additional staff exhibit number 15, which was a memorandum dated August 8th, 2024, advising those within the notice distance that it was being rescheduled to this evening's meeting. The applicant, Douglas County Land Department, is requesting a zone change from PR Public Reserve to 5R Rural Residential 5 on a 0.34 acre unit of land consisting of 4 lots of record to allow future residential development of the property at the 5R density. The property is located south of State Highway 38 off Main Street, which is abutting the Umpqua River, and it is located within the rural community of Scottsburg. The property is vacant of structural development and is a gentle sloping property towards the river. The surrounding properties are zoned 5R. The zone change criteria is contained within section 3.38.100 of chapter 3 of the Land Use and Development Ordinance. These criteria are A, the rezoning will conform with the applicable sections of the comprehensive plan. B, the site is suitable to the proposed zone. And C, there's been a conscious consideration of the public health, safety and welfare in applying the specific zoning regulations. So with this, planning staff would recommend approval of the requested zone change from PR Public Reserve to 5R, Rural Residential 5 for the 0.34 acre property, which meets the criteria of Article 38 of the Land Use and Development Ordinance. This concludes my staff report.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, the applicant or applicant's representative, if you wanna come speak.
Good evening, Planning Commission panel, Tony Page, Land Director, I'm also the General County Main Appraiser. I'm representing the property tonight for other departments, and I'm gonna put up a little billboard so you can kind of get a better idea of the property. The property is located at 0 Main Street in Scottsburg, Oregon, right about in the middle of town there on the river. This potential zone change is a 0.34 acre restrictive and very limited PR zone. And we're wanting to change it to a uniform zone to match the surrounding neighborhood, which is 5R, which is the standard residential zone in the area, as Jeff said. This parcel is located on both sides of this tract, our zone 5R, and the transition would be smooth in that regard. The newly adapted zone, if implemented, is desired for the potential of creating more options, which would include some development, useful recreational sites or potential housing for people. This property hasn't been used for anything other than a neighborhood parking lot for over 10 years. I drove by this property last weekend. It was very overgrown with blackberries, brush. And it's an eyesore. We've had complaints from the neighbors in the past. It needs to be cleaned up and maintained, and it's so far out of the county seat here that it's hard to get people over there to do any work, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We believe that the change to 5R would be beneficial for the uniformity and future development. However, at this time, there is no concrete plan to do anything other than to start with a zone change, and then we'll look at possibilities of future prospects. So nothing has been decided. This is the first step. So as you see here on the map, the property here with PR in green is the property we're talking about. This property to the left of it is actually a tax foreclosure from 1990, and it's zone 5R as well. It just happens to abut the property that's the PR zone. Everything surrounding this in this whole area is 5R. So it's roughly the same size, this adjoining property, as our subject property here. We believe that the highest and best use from a development standpoint and to maximize the value of the property is to go to 5R for the 4 points of highest and best use: legally permissible, physically possible, financially feasible, and maximally productive. We don't think the zone will adversely affect any statewide planning goal. There's rules and regulations. It may just be a recreational site, because of setbacks. But the most logical use is residential due to the condition of the property, and somebody needs to maintain it. So it would be a benefit to the whole area, I think, to have an ownership that would be conducive to keeping it clear. So I would ask that in accordance with the surrounding neighborhood that you would consider changing the zone. Do you have any questions I might be able to answer?
When did county take ownership of this and for what purpose?
The county took ownership in the '70s, I believe, and they were going to keep properties all over like this that they were gonna develop as parks. This had a picnic table and a waste paper, or a little dumpster there for a while, and then nobody was using it, it was overgrown. The neighbor here to the east parks his log truck on it, and there's been neighbors that have parked down in here, but most of it's overgrown and hasn't been used for anything in at least 10 years. I've never seen anybody down there when I've been working here for 23 years and I drive by this occasionally, and it's just never been used for anything. It's declining use and condition, just it's not conducive for any kind of a park, in my opinion. So nobody's taken an interest in it until now, for the ownership.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I'm done.
Tony?
Do you know where other public access to the river would be for that community in proximity to this one?
There is some undeveloped streets where they would have public access that never they're platted, but they were never developed. So those sections here that were public streets would be an access to the river, or I would imagine under the bridge on the ODOT right away. You could drive right underneath there. There's supposed to be
Are those
access.
Are those platted but not developed roads, are those owned by the county? Is that?
They're owned by the county, yeah. So,
Any other questions? Alright, thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay, those are parties opposed? Go for it, state your name and address.
Steve Slayton, 317 Main Street. Like I was saying earlier, we have property directly across from this said property. And I don't know if he was real clear about this, but that's a park. Eden Park is the name of that park. And he's completely wrong about access, because we access it all the time. And most of the neighbors do too, because we've scratched out a trail to get to the river. And I would think that's what a park is for, is to be able to get to the river. There's not that many parks that are river accessible, but we do utilize that. And it just, simple question is why somebody would want to take a park and turn it into residential. I don't understand that. That's all I got.
Good evening, my name is Bobby Slayton. Like my husband said, we own 317 Main Street, directly across from that park. And to my knowledge, there is no other access down to the river. All of the lots on the other side, he said there was access down. There is no access. Those were incorporated into the other lots years ago, from my understanding, and given so many feet were given to the property owners. There is absolutely no access. And part of what drew us to move to this area years ago was that park, and actually the Scottsburg Park on the other side of the bridge. There's a lot of amenities there for all the local residents, and it's not just elderly, retired, middle-aged, it's young families with kids as well. And some parts of that are overgrown, but for the most part, some of our neighbors with the blue houses to the left with what looks like a lot there, they take care of the area directly across from them. They actually mow it, it's green, it has grass, they have young kids. They access that all the time. There is a place right across from us that has some bamboo that grows there. The park comes once a year, whoever maintains that once a year, and cuts that down. Outside of that, I don't see anybody out there working to clean that up except for the local residents. We clean it up, we take care of bamboo, and I know this gentleman said that it's been a parking lot. That's not true either. There's been one resident who's lived there multiple generations, his family, and he has a logging truck. He's 88 or 90 years old. His name's Lee. and he just parked his truck down there because it was available. He wasn't trying to hurt anybody, he wasn't trying to make it trashy. None of the residents complained about that, to my knowledge. Doesn't bother me, didn't bother anybody else. They use that access, people all up and down our roadway and even the West Scottsburg come down, they walk down to the water, they access, there's a rope swing down there for the kids to swing into the water. Our neighbors paddleboard, kayak, we fish. My husband and I snorkel and swim and actually fish off the rocks out there. So it is widely accessed, and for the people who aren't fortunate enough to be able to afford property off of the river, this affords us the opportunity, as well as our neighbors who rent, to be able to access the amenities there. The other Scottsburg Park, there is access for a boat to go down, but it's not an easy access. There's no way we can pull our kayaks down there, paddle boards. It's not safe for young children to access the water there. And so this is a small park, but it has a big impact on the local residents in our small little community there. And we really appreciate that. And it's one of the things that drives people in. We get so much traffic on that road. It's a cute little spot. People pull off, they drive down, and there's so much traffic on 38. There's RVs and cars coming through all the time and stopping and going down. And I guess if you don't live there and you only go by once in a while to look at that area, you might think that it's not accessible and nobody uses it, but it is widely used. And I'm sure the tourists who come through the area appreciate that too, if they're looking for ways to access the river for their children and their family members. So not only do the local residents appreciate that, but I'm sure a lot of the tourists do as well when they're looking for places to stop as they're coming through Douglas County, going on to the other counties on the coast. So I would like to see that it stays the same, so not only I can enjoy it and the local residents and their kids, but the tourists as well that come through. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. No one else listed as opposed, so the applicant has an opportunity for a rebuttal.
I don't have a whole lot to say other than, there, since the last 10 years, I think the logging truck has been parked there. Every time I've driven by it, I've never seen any trails or anybody using it. And it's so overgrown that even I had a hard time pinpointing it, and I've been there several times. As far as a park, I kind of doubt that anybody that's driving Highway 138 there or 38 is gonna be able to pinpoint that that was a park unless they have some kind of a mapping system. And it's I'm sure if you follow the trail, you can get down there. I never saw the trail, but it's might open up, but it's pretty good. It's not visible from the road, so. It doesn't appear that there's a whole lot of people that use it. It appears that they do, but I think these access points that she was talking about are not deeded to anybody. If anybody's using them, if they're illegally using them, the streets here, this is a recent plat. This just came out about 2 weeks ago. So this is the current configuration with these points that are still platted streets that nobody should have their buildings or structures on. And this map is off by a little bit. You can tell that it should be back along the road. All these plats, so they maybe slid over a little bit. But so those would be technically, they could be accessed through those parcels if they wanted to, and then under the bridge, the other side of the river access there. That's about all I have to say. It's up to you on your decision. But
I have a question. So
Sure.
the left parcel on that image is already zoned R5 and it has been since the 70s.
everything on this strip is R5 right here.
Except for
So-
that, right,
And that parcel
is R5.
is R5 and it is a county ownership. It's a tax foreclosure. Nobody paid their taxes in 1990. We took that back. And so this is the only PR piece in the whole place, and then we gave the Scottsburg Community Center to the Scottsburg Community Service Organization to maintain, and then they've been maintaining that here recently, so
Has there been any discussion of them taking over this one that you're?
no. It's a lot of work to brush that thing, I would think. It's pretty hard for the Parks Department to financially come up with money to do that all the time, because it's a pretty far out to get out there to do it.
I'm thinking the Scottsburg community.
Right, they've never expressed interest in owning it, so.
So if the zone change was to happen, what would be moving forward, what would the county do with the property?
It's a potential that they would sell the property to an adjoining neighbor, put it up for auction, and see if one of the neighbors wanted it, as a potential. I think nothing's set in stone at this point, just trying to make more options, and with PR, it's limited to a really small restrictive, use. So nothing would happen right away until this happens and we change the zone, then it'll go on the table for options on what's the best for the county to move forward with the direction.
So theoretically, the zone change could happen and the property could still sit there
It could.
as it is today.
Question is, do you know if what other options has the park department explored for that property outside of?
They've been talking about doing something with it and changing the zone for probably 15 years
They thought
or
about
better,
investing
but
in it as a park?
there's not a lot of money, to invest in a park like that since it's so far out. They're struggling with just the parks that they maintain. So they're trying to tighten their rein on things that are closer, that they have to be there. They have somebody at the coast that maintains all of the Umpqua dunes and places like that, but this is right in the middle where, it's hard to get to for,
It's 0.34 acres if you drive, anyway, that's fine.
it's 0.34 of an acre, so it's not a whole lot, but
Thanks.
right.
Alright, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna close the public portion of this, and before we deliberate real quick, Jeff, I probably should have a little potential conflict of interest. This is out in my neck of the woods and I represent the utility company in that area and serve there, so I probably should abstain from the conversation on that and allow the rest of the commission to, just to keep things clean. I don't know why I didn't think about it earlier, but
Okay, yeah, if you feel that
I think these guys are more than capable of making a decision based on that.
Okay.
So I'll just continue running the meeting, but you guys can all abstain from voting, so. So let the deliberations start.
Who has a thought?
The one thing I'd say is the town's owned the foreclosed property next to it, and they haven't done anything with it. As the people opposed said, the neighbors across the street still walk across that property and maintain that property and use it to access. As well as there's the Scottsburg Park across the river there that has access to it. There's also the unplotted roads that have access. There's also one on a map in between the two properties. It's a plotted road. I think we approved the commission or the planning department's, so I'll make a motion to approve the planning department's recommendation as is.
Okay, I have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any other discussion?
I noticed that the 100-year flood overlay was done. What is that? The 100-year floodplain overlay was done. What is, Jeff, can you inform us on what that looked like? Off the top of your head.
whether is proposed for development, the current zoning, or if approved to the 5R, any development would have to be subject to FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency requirements for floodplain and or floodway. So that,
Do you know where this property sits in that off hand?
It is in one of the exhibits, but it is mapped floodway. The exhibit that referenced that would show a pink-ish color and a blue color. And the pink on the floodplain map is the federal floodway. So that does make some restrictions, but again, those restrictions exist whether under the current zoning
Right,
or if
right,
it was approved to the 5R, which would match the current plan designation.
Thank you.
So it's gonna. It's 10.
Okay. So it's all in the floodway.
Yeah. And you're
Okay, so thank you. Looking at the floodway is adjacent to the river, the floodplain is even higher on the hillside.
Any other discussion? I got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and I'll abstain. Okay, motion carries.
Dan, I was gonna be opposed.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Okay, so who we got in favor? Make sure everyone,
Yeah, it's got 4-1.
4, okay, opposed, 1, and 1 abstained. Going out. Okay, so motion carries. Move on to the next.
Before moving on, just to note for the record that the summary of this meeting will then be prepared, and at the next meeting, the findings will be reviewed and signed. There will be a mailing out of those findings and decision, and there will be then an appeal period that's officially after those findings are signed. So that would be the next step in the process for this agenda item.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
The next item is Douglas County Planning Department file number 24059. Request for the comprehensive plan amendment of 22.82 acres of land from forest transitional to commercial with an exemption to statewide planning goals 3 and 4. So do we have any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts or site visits?
No.
Okay. Qualified parties, do we have a list on this one, or do we just need to ask? Or did you?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
Yep.
Okay.
From those that we received comments from, there's a few noted there.
Was there anyone else that would like to speak in favor of this? Okay, come up and state your
For the
name.
record, Tony Page, Douglas County Land Department, I am in favor of this.
And those that are opposed? We have some on the qualified party, a Deborah May Campbell and a Steve Marshall and Lucky Duck Campground. Not here? Okay. And those that are neutral? No one's here from ODFW? Not for that? Okay. Okay, staff, you got staff report?
Chairman Burke, members of the commission, I have staff exhibits 1 through 19 entered to the record. A brief summary of the staff report here. The applicant, Douglas County, is requesting a comprehensive plan amendment on a 22.82 acre unit of land from farm forest transitional to commercial, CO, with an exception to statewide planning goals 3 and 4, together with a zone change from public reserve to rural commercial. The subject property is located at the end of Curtin Park Road, immediately adjacent to the Curtin Rural Community and adjacent to the west side of Interstate 5 at exit 163 interchange. The property, known as Pass Creek Park, is listed as an active park in the county's local parks master plan and is the site of a pre-existing full-service RV park and campground that was established in the 1960s. The site is developed and operates as an active RV park and campground with 30 pool hookup sites and several tent sites, including developed wells and septic with drain fields. The applicant asserts there has been a steady decline in recreational use of the park, making it a financial drain on the Douglas County Park System. The applicant desires to redesignate the property to CRE, which is the rural commercial, and to make it the property more viable for rural commercial development, and intends to sell the property at a public auction. The property lies immediately adjacent to the current rural community, lands adjacent to the northwest across the railroad and Curtin Road, and to the northeast across Interstate 5 are zoned FF, Farm Forest, and TR, Timberland Resource. Lands adjacent to nearby to the south and southwest and southeast are within the community of Curtin are zoned CRC, Rural Community Commercial, and 5R, Rural Residential 5 acre, and PR, Public Reserve. Several properties along Curtin Road are developed with existing residential and commercial uses. Applicable criteria: the Douglas County Land Use and Development Ordinance, section chapter 6.500 establishes the procedure for quasi-judicial comprehensive plan amendments and set forth the applicable criteria as follows. Section 2, the application shall follow the following standards, which shall be standard for the amendment: that the amendment complies with statewide planning goals and applicable administrative rules, which includes OAR 660-12, which is the Transportation Planning Rule, adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission pursuant to ORS 197-240 and ORS revised to ORS 197-245. That the amendment provides a reasonable opportunity to satisfy a local need for a different land use. A demonstration of need for the change may be based upon special studies and other factual information. C, that the particular property in question is suited to the proposed land use, and if an exception is involved, that the property in question is best suited for the use as compared to other available properties. The proposed comprehensive plan amendment involves a physically developed exception to Goal 3, the agricultural lands goal, and Goal 4, the forest lands goal, which is subject to Oregon Administrative Rule OAR 660-004-0025, land physically developed to other uses as follows. Exception requirements for land physically developed to other uses. 1, a local government may adopt an exception to a goal when the land subject to the exception is physically developed to the extent that is no longer available for uses allowed by the applicable goal. Other uses may also apply as described in OAR 660-004-000, which is the purpose statement. And item 2, whether land has been physically developed with uses not allowed by an applicable goal will depend on the situation at the site of the exception. The exact nature and extent of the areas found to be physically developed shall be clearly set forth in the justification for the exception. The specific areas must be shown on a map or otherwise described and keyed to the appropriate findings of fact. The findings of fact shall identify the extent and location of the existing physical development on the land and can include information on structures, roads, sewer and water facilities, and utility facilities. Uses allowed by the applicable goal to which an exception is being taken shall not be used to justify a physically developed exception. Ludo Article 28 establishes criteria for approval of a zone change as follows. Item 2, it established that the rezoning will conform to the applicable sections of the comprehensive plan. The site is suitable for the proposed zone, and Three, that there is a conscious consideration of the public health, safety, and welfare in applying the specific zoning regulations.
Just real quick, I believe you might have said Article 28, so if the record heard that, it's Article 38.
38, so if I did mess up, it's not some other zone, it is 38. Sorry for that. So notice of the proposed amendment was provided to the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development on July 24th, which was at least 35 days prior to tonight's first evidentiary hearing. Property owners within 500 feet, affected public districts and agencies, and the North County Planning Advisory Committee were notified of the request by mail on July 24th. And notice was also published in the News Review. The staff report details the different review of all the different applicable goals and criteria. At the end, there's a recommendation based on the findings outlined in the staff report. Planning staff recommends approval of the requested comprehensive plan amendment from Farm Forest Transitional, FFT, to Commercial, CO, with an exception to the statewide planning goals 3 and 4, together with a zone change from PR, Public Reserve, to CRE, Rural Commercial, on the subject 22.82 acre unit of land. The proposed request meets the criteria of Chapter 6, Section 6.500, and Chapter 3, Article 38 of the Douglas County Land Use and Development Ordinance, and the requirements for land physically developed exceptions to goals 3 and 4, subject to the following. 1, if a higher rural commercial use is proposed that exceeds the established trip cap of 315 ADT or average daily traffic, that proposed commercial use cannot move forward until a traffic analysis or traffic study is submitted and reviewed and approved by Douglas County and the Oregon Department of Transportation to demonstrate that the transportation system is or can be made adequate to accommodate the new rural commercial use on the subject property. Number 2, any future development, including expansion of the existing RV park and campground, will require coordination with the Oregon Department of State Lands, DSL, and or the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, ODFW, to address and minimize any potential impacts to the wetlands and riparian areas on the property. 3, any future expansion of the existing RV park and campground will require review as a conditional use permit under the CRE zone. Any questions?
Thank you. All right, the applicant's representative for testimony.
Commission panel, this is Tony Page, Douglas County Land Director, Real Estate Appraiser. And I'm representing this property tonight. I'll put up another map so you can kind of get a little better view of it. It's a little bit, have some visual aids, I think. This one goes, yeah. I'll keep it pretty simple. I agree with all of the planning department's findings and suggestions, and this property highlighted in red here is the property in question. The green areas that are shaded in here are roughly the wetlands, state designations and the Corps of Engineers, and those would have to be avoided, and they are at this point. The development that's currently there are 30 spaces sitting in the middle here, and there's drain fields and water sources and septic drain fields out in this area here, a little storage area back in there. So the majority, well, maybe 50-50, maybe 10 to 12 acres is potentially developable, and the rest is not due to the wetlands issues. So
So what part is county owned right now? Or
what part is what?
what part is county owned right now? Does it
The
sound-
county owns everything in this red box here.
Okay.
This is the new, I don't know if it's a Texaco, the convenience store with the gas pumps right here. This is commercial all around it. There's a hotel here.
So if it's county owned, who owns the RV park then? The county does, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, the RV park, right.
Okay,
So this whole block here in red, and the RV park is real hard to see kind of, but it's in the middle here, and there's 30 spaces.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
With the surrounding properties all being commercial, we feel that would be the best heights and best use, and then housing is difficult in Cottage Grove and this area, and possibly potentially somebody could be interested in making these developed RV spots into maybe some manufactured home parts and, you know, keep some RV spots up to whoever develops it, you know, but we think that housing would be increased greatly. There's a big need for it, we believe, so. Anybody have any questions?
Are there any other park amenities there?
There's a playground, there's a caretaker residence up front, right in here, and then there are ducks that go in the wildlife area, and then there's a little playground, and there's a little.
There's a shower and a bathroom, isn't there?
Okay.
So, yeah.
For some reason I was recalling a disc golf course, but I don't know.
No,
It's not here.
It's a high expense to the Parks Department, and it's been declining since I've been here also. The revenues don't add up, it's running in the red. It's not making any money, and it's costing a lot more to keep it going, so it's one of those, it's kind of, and the declining use, I think, shows that the recreational aspect of it is not worth keeping because of the revenues that it brings in. There's also limitations on PR zone, is that, you know, people can only stay there for 14 days in a row and then they have to move. So that's another limitation that this commercial zone would help alleviate, is the amount of time that people reside there, so. PR zone is pretty limiting.
Any other questions? Alright, thanks, sir.
Thank you.
And no one else in favor? Is anyone opposed? Do you have anyone opposed? Okay, no reason for a rebuttal at this point. Okay, we'll close the public portion and deliberate. Any thoughts?
It's a difficult piece of property. Yes.
Yep.
That is my bad, totally sorry.
It's like $1.
You're cheap. Hey Jeff, I have a quick technical question.
Yes.
If this was changed as we just mentioned with the PR zone resident or people at the park can only stay 14 days. If it were to be sold and redeveloped by somebody else, they'd have to go through the land for additional spaces, they'd have to go through the whole process again, correct? But the current RV park, they would just keep as is, correct, if they bought it? Like, they don't have to get additional conditional use permits for that?
Right, it is under the current zoning allowed for the use. So somebody, whether it was the county or in theory, if it were to sell under the current zoning, there'd be some flexibility, but you do have, it's managed differently and regulated differently. And so that's where with the plan of zone change approval, you have more flexibility in developing a full-fledged RV park.
I guess my main question is, if the county kept possession and we approved the change and they changed the zoning, could the county then allow long-term stay and not just 14-day stay?
Oh, right, yeah, there's a different set of rules that would then, under the CRE zoning, can be managed and run differently. I believe the development of RV parks is contained within the Oregon Administrative Rules, and I think there's a length of stay requirement. It might be 120 days, but I'm not 100% positive on that, but it's definitely different.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if I'm hearing correctly, want to request a zone change so the county can surplus the property. Why couldn't you just surplus it as is without the zone change?
My assumption is that it's only allowed the current amount of spaces and only 14-day stays. So it limits your pool of, you would surplus it to no one would really, if it's at a loss right now for the county with the revenue, then no one would want to be able to probably purchase it at the current capacity.
I was gonna say, I don't wanna,
Answer that?
yeah, I don't wanna speak out of
Well,
turn, but we can,
Yeah, Jeff, probably knows more of the rules than I do, but I was told, or I assumed from the conversations that I had with planning, that no, mobile home development could go into the current zone. So say somebody wanted to have, single wides on one side of the property and, for permanent stay, and maybe they wanted to keep the other side some temporary spots for RVs or whatever. That under PR zone that we couldn't do that, is that a correct assumption that we couldn't have permanent manufactured homes there year round?
right, there's definitely the limitation of kind of what you have there currently is arguably pre-existing, but it's not necessarily pre-existing non-conforming, which is a term sometimes when you find a use that's grandfathered in and prior to the zoning rules, the current rules would allow some flexibility for what's there, but not an expansion or change in use to the like a manufactured
Somebody wanted
or
to have
other
a
type of,
little store up front or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
I mean, something
no
that,
other commercial type of development could be in conjunction with the PR. And then I was gonna say, from my understanding with you, there's the side of things too with sale and comparables from a
Yeah.
that standpoint.
from finding a property that's PR zone, that's publicly owned, to come up with a value for this property is gonna be almost impossible, so. But there are lots of rural commercial properties that have RV parks that could put a dollar value on it, but as it is, I think it's, in my opinion, as an appraiser, and this is, I don't have any specific sales to back it up, but I've never been able to find any PR zoned mobile home parks or RV parks that would compare, so I, going out on a limb, I would assume that would limit the value down in a potential buyer, you're all usually pretty savvy guys up there with businesses, with the unknown of and the limitations on PR versus commercial, which is pretty wide open on what you wanna do. If you wanted to put something in that maybe isn't there now, you'd look at the limitations, and that would be it would equate to a dollar value loss that you would be willing to pay, I'm sure, so.
So bottom line is by the county taking the steps to get the zone changed, it's gonna make the property more marketable.
You're right, yeah.
And the intent to sell it pretty much or auction.
That is, nothing is set in stone. The first step is this, and then that was discussed, and if we get through this, then that would be roundtabled and definitely be a big option, so.
Thank you. Seems pretty straightforward. Entertain a motion, I got a motion?
Yeah, I was looking for the number.
Um,
was in front of me.
It is 24059.
Okay, so I move that we approve 24059 as presented.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
For clarification, with the three conditions.
Correct? As presented.
As presented, yeah. Okay.
No, good catch, Vicky. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, alright, motion carries. Okay, the next item is Shoestring Solar LLC, Conifer Energy Partners, Planning Department file number 24-031. This is a referral for a request for a conditional use permit for a commercial utility facility for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale. Do I have any commissioners with any conflicts of interest, ex parte, or site visits? Okay. Qualified parties, we have a list. Those that qualified in favor was Shoestring Solar LLC, The applicants listed here, neutral was the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, opposed, there is a whole list. You want to read them, Jeff, or do we just wanna go through who's here, or what do
I
you?
think in this instance, you could just poll the audience to see who's
who's not?
here, and then those that are here would be qualified.
Okay, so we already have the in favor, well, we'll just go through. Those in favor, if you could come forward real quick and just state your name
Good evening.
and address.
Keenan Orden Battalion. My address is 1211 Southwest Fifth Ave, Portland, Oregon. I'm an attorney with the law firm Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt, and I'm appearing on behalf of Shoestring Solar. In addition, we have Spencer and Jonathan, project managers for Shoestring.
Okay, alright.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Got some more? Those that are neutral?
I'm here from ODFW. I'm here if you have questions, but I did not sign up to talk.
To speak, okay.
I have, I didn't do those in my letters, so.
Do we need her to state her name and stuff, or at this point, if she speaks?
Record reflect Amy Dar, ODFW.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, thank you.
Yes, you can pass those.
And those opposed, so if everyone could come up that is opposed and just state your name and address, if you'd like to speak, come on up.
Debbie Bixby, 664 Metcalf Lane, Brittle, Oregon.
Just trying to find your name. Is she on here?
Hello,
Oh,
my
there it
name,
is, there it is, okay, go ahead.
hello, my name is Amanda Nash. I am property owner at 601 Shoestring Road.
Amanda Nash, okay. Oh, thank you, sir.
I also propose Frank Elias. I live right there on Glenbrook.
Okay.
And tell the truth, I ain't find anybody who's in favor of it at all, period.
Okay, thanks, sir. Okay, keep on coming up.
I'm Jennifer Hammond and I am representing Steve Heinrich as well. He's the property owner. I rent the property 461 Shoestring, so I'm directly across where
And what was your name again?
Jennifer Hammond. So
For
I'm
which
direct-
prop, sorry,
461 Shoestring.
the owner?
The owner is Steve Heinrich. I'm a renter.
Thank you.
Is that acceptable?
He's called several times.
And we've gotten comments from Mr. Heinrich.
Okay, okay, just wanna make sure. Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
Tom Bixby, live at 664 Metcalf Lane.
Alright, thank you.
Janelle Swanson, 707 Shoestring Road. And Ron Coltrane, 707 Shoestring Road.
See that one on the list here, Jeff? You say your name again, I'm sorry, was it Jeannie Swanson?
No, Swanson.
Janelle.
She's on the
Janelle.
bottom half.
Okay, there we go. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak opposed? Got the neutral, got those in favor. Alright, I believe we are ready for the staff report.
Okay, let's see, okay, so I have a staff exhibits 1 through what's the number originally was 17, but I have some additional exhibits into the record, which we'll get down to staff exhibits, so to 18 through 22. So the additional exhibits that I'm entering into the record, the hearing was originally scheduled for July, but it got, because of the canceled planning commission meeting, so this was rescheduled. So we had sent out that day an email, so that this was, we wanted to try to make sure that that got into the record, that we had tried to send everybody about that. There's also an August 6th memorandum about the redate, about the date and place and date for the tonight's hearing. So that was dated August 6th. We also have the August 21st supplemental staff report, which is staff exhibit number 20. And it is, it has this short cover memo, but then it has the additional letters that came between the mailing of the original staff report in July 11th to mail out last week. So there's some letters that were there. And then there's a staff exhibit 21, which is a letter from the applicant's attorney, dated from a couple days ago, but it was regarding some additional comments to put into the record. And then there's, which I have a copy of that was given to each of you. And then there's also staff exhibit 22, which I believe the applicant is going to submit some extra copies, but that was correspondence that was received yesterday or this morning technically, and so it was some maps and some other comments to put into the record. So but those are all staff exhibits to go into the record. And there you go.
Got it.
There's just copies of that. So for tonight's hearing, this summary of the staff report. The applicant in this matter, Shoestring Solar LLC, care of Conifer Energy Partners, referral of a request of a conditional use permit, CUP, for a commercial utility facility for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale, photovoltaic solar power generation facility. The proposed commercial solar facility will encompass 11 acres of the subject 130.82 acre property and will be located adjacent to the east side of Shoestring Road, approximately 1 mile southwest of the city of Riddle. The 103.82 acre property is developed with an existing 1965 single-family dwelling and several miscellaneous outbuildings. The property is designated agriculture, AGC and AGG by the Douglas County Comprehensive Plan. The property is split by Glenbrook Loop Road with a portion located north of the road zoned FC2, cropland, exclusive farm use cropland 40 acre, and the portion south of the road is zoned FG, exclusive farm use grazing by the Douglas County Land Use and Development Ordinance. The proposed 11 acre site for the commercial utility facility will be located in the FG zone portion of the property. The surrounding, adjacent, and nearby properties are zoned primarily for resource use, with FC2 to the north on the north side of Glenbrook Road and across Cow Creek, and FG and FF farm forest to the east, south, and west of the subject property. A small enclave of property zoned 5R, rural residential 5 acre, is located adjacent to the east, northeast along Glenbrook Loop Road, and 2 enclaves of property zoned RR, rural residential 2 acre exists, with one located directly across Shoestring Road within 750 feet of the proposed commercial utility facility, and the other located with 1,000 feet to the west along Glenbrook Loop Road. A small parcel zoned ME, rural industrial, is located to the northeast across Cow Creek. There are numerous single-family dwellings located in the immediate area around the subject property and in proximity to the site of the proposed commercial utility facility. Due to the large number of objections to the application from adjacent and surrounding property owners, the planning director has referred this application to the planning commission for review and consideration pursuant to Ludo section 2.060.4E. Applicable criteria. The proposed commercial solar facility will be located on the east side of Shoestring Road in the FG zone portion of the property. The FG zone under section 3.3 permits as a conditionally permitted use commercial utility facilities for the purpose of generating power for public use by the sale on 10 acres or greater, including wind power generation facilities, photovoltaic solar power generation facilities, associated transmission lines, transmission towers over 200 feet in height, and a renewable energy facility. A commercial utility facility subject to the applicable standards of OAR 660, 33-130, and the ORS definitional standards. The proposed conditional use is subject to the applicable criteria of OAR, Oregon Administrative Rule 660, Division 33, and Section 130, particularly item 38 for the siting of a photovoltaic power generation facility. The proposed conditional use is also subject to the applicable criteria of Article 39, conditional use review standards, Article 3, 3.3150, which is the conditional use approval standards, as well as Article 30, floodplain overlay, and Article 3.32200, riparian vegetation corridor overlay. The criteria for approval of a conditional use are provided in Article 39, 3.39050 of the Land Use and Development Ordinance as follows. The approving authority may grant a request for conditional use approval if the following criteria are met. The proposed use is or may be made compatible with existing adjacent permitted uses and other uses permitted in the underlying zone. Number 2, the proposed use complies with other development approval criteria within the applicable zone. In addition, the Land Use and Development Ordinance, section 3.3150, which is the conditional use approval standards of the FG zone, also state the approving authority shall consider the following additional criteria which must be met prior to approval of a conditional use. The use would not, A, force a significant change in accepted farm or forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm or forest use, and or B, significantly increase the cost of accepted farm and forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm or forest use. The approving authority shall also impose any conditions necessary to meet the applicable criteria so as to preserve agricultural land. Nothing herein shall be construed to require the granting of a conditional use permit. The criteria set forth in this section shall apply to farm and forest uses conducted within parcels with single-family residential dwellings approved under ORS 215.284, an exception area approved under ORS 197.732, or an acknowledged urban growth boundary. Procedural findings of fact. Administrative notice of this application was mailed to property owners within 750 feet of the subject property, affected service providers, governmental agencies, and the South County Planning Advisory Committee on May 16th, 2024. Numerous written responses were received, primarily objecting to the proposed request. The South County PAC held a meeting on the application on May 28th, 2024. After discussion, the PAC recommended denial of the proposed application, stating that the negative effects of the proposed use outweigh the benefits received through the power that might be generated by the facility. Based on the number of responses received, the planning director referred the matter to the planning commission for review and consideration. We sent out a notice of the proposed request of the notice of public hearing that was mailed on June 25th, originally 2024, and notice was published in the News Review at least 20 days prior to July 18th's originally scheduled hearing. Notice of the rescheduled planning commission hearing was mailed on August 6th to advise people of the date and time of the new hearing. Numerous adjacent and surrounding property owners submitted comments and objections to the proposed request. In summary, these comments and concerns included several of the following: proximity of the solar facility to existing residential uses and dwellings in the area, visual impacts and sightliness of the facility, adverse impacts to local wildlife and ecosystems, negative impacts on fencing on local wildlife, loss of farmland at the project site, environmental impacts, long-term health effects of solar farms, decreased property values, degradation of soils including compaction and erosion, noise from the solar facility, fire danger from the solar facility, and long-term maintenance and landscaping of the facility, as well as future and decommissioning of the facility, including responsibility for removal, salvaging, and disposal of equipment. Conclusion. Based on the cited findings and exhibits in the staff report, the requested conditional use permit for commercial utility facility for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale, photovoltaic solar power generation facility on the 11-acre portion of the subject 130.82 acre property has been found to meet the applicable criteria of OIR 660, Division 33, Section 130 for the siting of a photovoltaic solar power generation facility. The proposed conditional use could be found to be also meet the criteria of LUDO, Article 39, Conditional Use Review Standards, Article 3, Section 3.3150, Conditional Use Approval Standards, as well as the criteria of Article 30 and Article 32, 3.200, the riparian vegetation corridor overlay. Article 30 was the floodplain overlay. Action alternatives, the planning commission can close the public hearing and move to either alternative number 1. The planning commission approves the requested application based on the findings of the staff report and or testimony brought forward through the public hearing process. We recognize the approval criteria can be met, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, all aspects of the commercial utility facility for the purpose of generating power for public use by sale, photovoltaic power, solar power generation facility shall be conducted on the property in substantial conformance with the operation as represented in the application and the supplemental materials submitted for the request. Condition number 2, the applicant property owner shall submit an approved access permit from Douglas County Public Works confirming that the existing or proposed access approach onto Shoestring Road, County Road number 44, meets county access standards. Condition number 3, the applicant leasee shall sign and record with the Douglas County Clerk a restrictive covenant for resource management. Such covenant shall specify that owners of adjacent and nearby land will be allowed to conduct normal resource management practices on their properties and that the land and that the owner and subsequent owners of the subject tract waive all rights to object to legal resource management activities. The required form may be obtained from the planning department. A copy of the recorded document shall be submitted to the planning department. Condition number 4, the applicant leasee shall submit a copy of the duly executed agreements which establishes the owner of the said commercial utility facility as the responsible party for facility maintenance, access, and abandonment and removal of the facility once it ceases to be operational. Condition number 5, the applicant leasee shall coordinate with the planning department regarding submittal of a bond or other security imposing the responsibility for retiring the photovoltaic solar power generation facility. Number 6, at the end of the useful life of the photovoltaic solar power generation facility, the facility shall be retired substantially in conformance with the application, including all non-utility owned equipment, conduits, structures, and foundations, which shall be removed to a depth of at least 3 feet below grade, and the project area will be restored to its original condition to be used for farming activities. Condition number 7, the applicant/property owner shall submit written confirmation from the Riddle Rural Fire District that compliance with the applicable provisions of OFC, which is the Oregon Fire Code, for fire protection for the facility has been coordinated with the Riddle Rural Fire District and has been provided for to the district's satisfaction. Condition number 8, the applicant leasee shall coordinate with state and federal agencies to obtain any applicable permits for the proposed use, including the Oregon Department of State Lands, DSL, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, ODFW, and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. Condition number 9, the applicant owner of the facility shall be required to coordinate with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife the installation of appropriate security fencing around the perimeter of the solar facility that provides visual screening of the facility from adjacent and nearby owners, residences, yet also mitigates adverse impacts to local wildlife. Condition number 10, to ensure that excessive soil erosion on the site of the proposed facility will be avoided or remedied, the owner-operator of the facility shall remain in compliance with the erosion control measures identified in the approved erosion control and soil compaction relief plan. Condition number 11, to ensure soil compaction relief and that unnecessary soil compaction will be avoided or remedied in a timely manner, the owner-operator of the facility shall remain in compliance with the measures identified in the approved erosion control and soil compaction relief plan. Condition number 12, To avoid the unabated introduction of or spread of noxious or undesirable weeds, the owner-operator of the facility shall provide a copy of the long-term maintenance program and remain in compliance with the measures identified in the approved weed mitigation plan. Condition 13, once the appeal period has expired and the required conditions of approval have been met, the applicant shall obtain a planning clearance worksheet for the commercial voltaic solar power generation facility on the subject property. Planning clearance will allow the applicant to proceed with the building department for necessary permits to accommodate the use. Condition 14, any signs placed in conjunction with the commercial utility facility shall conform to the sign requirements contained in the property development standards of the FG zone. Alternative number 2, approve the request application with modifications and or additional conditions of approval based on findings of fact and or testimony brought forward through the public hearing, which recognize that approval criteria can be met. Possible additional conditions to consider include 1, the applicant property owner shall apply and maintain a dust palliative to the access road to minimize dust from the vehicle traffic associated with the proposed commercial utility facility. Alternative number 3, continue the public hearing to a specified date or time, or close the public hearing and leave the record open to a specified date or time to allow for submittal of additional evidence and rebuttal. Alternative number 4, deny the requested application based upon the findings of fact and or testimony brought forward through the public hearing, which recognize the approval criteria have not been met. Any questions?
Thank you. All right, the applicant or applicant's representative would like to come forward with testimony.
I guess I do have a question, but it pertains to the conditions, and I don't know if now is the time to do that or it would be later.
Yep.
That's fine, that's
Yeah.
Yes,
I have questions. Okay, so applicant or applicant's representative, if you wanna come forward and present your name and address and fire away.
All right, good evening, Chair Burke, members of the commission. Again, for the record, my name is Keenan Orton-Bacallion. I'm an attorney with the law firm Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt. My address is 1211 Southwest 5th Ave, Portland, Oregon. With me tonight are Jonathan Nelson, Spencer Wallace, the project developers for Shoestring. They're gonna speak after me, but I'm gonna do a couple things here first. Also wanna apologize for deluging you guys with all the paper here. Hopefully you've had a chance to see that already, but if not, really the intent of that was just to respond to some of the public comments that have come in and cite evidence that was already in the record or produce new evidence to further address those concerns. So I plan tonight, like I said, is to turn things over to Jonathan and Spencer to run through a presentation they've prepared. This presentation provides an overview of the subject application. They're also available for any project-related questions. In terms of legal questions, please direct those to me. I'd be happy to answer them. I do want to address a couple key points here. First, we've reviewed the staff report. We agree with staff's recommendation of approval as well as the conditions. We appreciate their hard work on this project and obviously the thorough run through tonight. In terms of the public comments that have been submitted in opposition to the application, we provided responses in the form of written testimony as well as evidentiary submittals like I noted. And although we certainly respect the rights of members of the public to voice their concerns for this project, I think that we'd like to note that it's our position that none of those concerns actually address relevant approval criteria. I think the criteria have been addressed through the substantial evidence in the record which we've submitted, and I believe all that criteria is met. Nonetheless, again, we've taken the time to thoroughly consider and address the themes and issues that have been raised through those public comments. And it's our hope that through this presentation and through the evidence we provided in the record that the public will have a better understanding of this project and hopefully we've laid some concerns. Critical to tonight's hearing, Shoestring's application materials and follow-on testimony clearly demonstrate that we comply with all the relevant approval criteria. And again, we respectfully request the application be approved. I'm gonna turn things over to Spencer and Jonathan. I'll follow up with some additional comments and then my understanding is in terms of process, the public will go and I'd like the opportunity to rebut if necessary. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Burke and Commission members. I'm Jonathan Nelson. I'm the project developer Shoestring Solar. My business is Conifer Energy Partners. I've been developing these projects in Oregon since 2017. I'm a native Oregonian, grew up in Wilsonville, kind of between Wilsonville and Sherwood. Currently live up in Washington State now, but I'm still plugging away at projects like this here in Oregon. The purpose of this presentation is to really just give an overview of what we're proposing to do with this project, answer any questions that you might have about the general characteristics of these projects and why we're proposing it for this site and this property here in Douglas County. Can someone, you can cue? Okay, thank you. So you can go to the next slide. So we have a brief PowerPoint here that we'll go over to give that overview. And what I'm gonna cover, I'll touch briefly on solar in Oregon, where it's at in terms of installed capacity, what its role is in the fuel mix and providing electricity for the state. We'll cover some of the high-level details of our development process, what goes into site selection, development and construction and operation, some of the project specifics and construction aspects that relate to this project, impact to surrounding farm uses and forest uses, the benefits, and then end with just a high-level overview on the applicable land use criteria. Next slide. So at a really high level, looking at solar's, the role of solar power in Oregon State, it's helpful to look at what the overall fuel mix is and how it fits into the overall generation portfolio of the state where we get our electricity. The majority of electricity in Oregon comes from hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River and other smaller rivers and tributaries around the state. That accounts for about 42% of Oregon's electric power. And that's highly dependent on the water year and what the snowpack is during the wintertime, because all of the hydropower is basically produced from snowmelt runoff after the wintertime. The next biggest share goes to fossil fuels. This would mostly be some natural gas and oil burning generation in the state. That accounts for about 38% of the fuel mix, and that is also water year dependent because the fossil fuel generation is the most expensive in the fuel stack, and it's also the most adjustable, so it can be throttled down or up depending on what the hydroelectric generation is doing or what other variable generation sources are doing. Wind is at 15%, and then solar and other renewables are at about 5%. With regards to solar, solar primarily displaces the fossil fuel generation. Like I mentioned earlier, fossil fuels, they're adjustable generators, and so any generation that we get from renewable sources like solar is basically a direct replacement for that fossil fuel generation out of the stack. So the benefit of that is you're getting the electricity from a local source that doesn't have a fuel cost, that there's no associated emissions, and is a relatively passive, benign form of energy production relative to other options. Next slide, please. In terms of where Oregon stands, so it's about 24th in the nation for installed capacity. There's about 1,815 megawatts of solar installed. That's enough to power about 233,000 homes. It represents an investment of more than 3.1 billion in the state, supports about 4,000 jobs. Looking at kind of what it's done over the past decade, there has been a significant amount of growth, and that's really a testament to the cost declines over the last decade. There's been a 64 to 82% reduction in the install costs for either residential or utility or community scale solar, and that's just a result of further economization and economies of scale in the industry to bring the cost down to where you can install solar in a place like Oregon where there's more clouds than a place like Arizona. Next slide, please. So for our development process, there's really three categories. It's site selection, and then working with the utility for the utility agreements, power purchase agreement, and interconnection agreement, and then the zoning and permitting, which is why we're here tonight. So for site selection, we can't put these sites anywhere. There's some criteria that have to be met. So we have to first be close to a substation that has capacity that we can interconnect to. All the projects that we work on are distribution level interconnected, so we're not connecting far away on high voltage transmission and then importing the power into wherever it's used. These are local projects where the power is injected onto the local grid and then used by individuals that are served by those same poles and wires. So we have to be within proximity to a good substation that has interconnection capacity. We have to have a site that's relatively free of any major environmental issues. We don't develop in floodplains. We try to stay away from wetlands and no areas that would create any additional like environmental permitting risk or liabilities. And then we also have to have an interested landowner. Not everyone is willing to lease their land to us. So that is kind of the final restriction in terms of where we can put the sites. In this case, we have a long-term ground lease with the landowners, and they came to us and reached out because they're looking to diversify the income from their farm and from their property, and this fit the bill well because they still want to farm, but they also want that extra diversity from additional revenue from a different source other than farming. So then the next step is working with the utility, in this case PacifiCorp, to start the interconnection study process where we file an application. They tell us if the grid has capacity to interconnect. If it doesn't, what are the upgrades that we have to pay for to bring the grid up to capacity to interconnect it safely and in a way that they can maintain reliability on their system. And then why we're here tonight is the zoning and permitting, working with local jurisdictions to file our permitting applications, address any concerns. We realize that not everyone may want us to be there, but we want to do what we can to try to be a good neighbor, and so that was why we attended the May meeting and have made some tweaks to our siting design for this project to hopefully alleviate some of those concerns. Next slide, please. So in terms of what goes into these, they're very, very simple facilities. The three main components are racking, just steel posts that are pounded into the ground. There's no concrete that's used, like no major fill of the agricultural land or the soils. They're just posts that are pounded into the ground with nuts and bolts that attach the solar panels, and then wire to connect them to the inverters. And that's about it. They're very simple kind of plug and play systems these days. The industry has matured quite a bit, and a facility can be built like the one that we're proposing can be built in anywhere from like 3 to 6 months. It's not like a gas-fired plant or a coal plant or a nuke plant where it's a multi-year long development cycle and construction cycle. They come together easily, and the impacts from them are relatively low. Next slide. So getting into some project specifics, Ms. Holly already mentioned kind of the characteristics of the subject property we're on. We're proposing about 11-acre project on 130-acre tract. This project is sized at 2.5 megawatts AC, and that's enough to produce about 5.2 million kilowatt hours or power about 400 homes. Like I mentioned earlier, it's grid tied, so it's connected to the distribution grid. All of the power that's going to be produced will go out directly to the local community and provide electricity to whoever's connected to PacifiCorp's grid there. And then this project, in terms of how the power is sold, we're developing this to participate in Oregon's community solar program. That's what a lot of the projects of this type have been developed for, and what that is, it's a program that allows customers of the investor-owned utilities to basically have another option than the monopoly utility in town, where they can opt in to source their power from a locally sited, locally built and operating project. And if they do that, then the power is credited towards their bill, often at a discount of like 5 to 10%. So it's a way for them to have additional choice and then also a little bit of savings on their electricity bill, which is very important for some people right now, just given a lot of the rate increases that have come down the pipe recently from the major utilities. Next slide, please. So in terms of siting, this is just a up close screenshot of the site plan. Some siting considerations include a setback from Shoestring Road that I believe is required from the county's development ordinance. We're avoiding national wetland inventoried wetlands with the current layout, and from hearing concerns of the view or the look of the facility at the May meeting, we have offered to put up a solid wood slatted fence instead of like chain link or a wire game style fence. And that basically entirely obscures and obstructs the view from anyone on the outside. They won't be able to see through anything, and it will just look like a wood country fence around the property, around the project. And then also a perimeter access road that can serve as a additional fuel break to help add additional fire safety measures. Next slide, please. This one just shows a comparison of the project layout to the National Wetland Inventory wetlands. So as you can see there on the right, we're not really even close to them and are avoiding them entirely. And you know, we're sensitive to building and wanting to avoid wetlands wherever we can. One, for the added permitting burden that comes along with, but then also we don't wanna have these projects creating any additional issues in that realm. So the good news is in this case we're not for the wetlands. Next slide, please. So for siting, this just shows a couple pictures of the fencing. The picture on the left is from a project I developed in Willamina. It was built a couple years ago. It's on a farm forest parcel that is in the coastal elk range, and the landowner has had elk on their property. They continue to have elk on their property. In this instance, it was just a 6-inch square game style fencing that was put up. So you can see the project. In this for Shoestring, what we're proposing is a solid wood fence. So you can see there it's a solid wood fence, and there's no view. Next slide, please. So with regards to fire control and mitigation, this was also a concern that came up at the May meeting. I think as is, these facilities, they're not built by anyone and whoever according to however they want to slap them together. Like there's established industry code, electrical code, fire code. The project is already going to comply with all of that. In addition, all of the requirements from PacifiCorp to safely interconnect to their grid and have appropriate shutdown measures, like if there's a ground fault, the project trips offline, stuff like that. Since the May meeting, we did work with a professional or safety professional, GW LLC. They're construction and safety consultants in the region, and submitted one of the new submittals as a professionally prepared fire mitigation or fire prevention plan. And that plan highlights all the relevant fire codes and standards that the project would be subject to and intend to comply with. Prescribes fire mitigation measures for facility construction and operation, and then also calls out that we'll coordinate with Riddle Rural Fire District to do a defensible space consultation with them and make sure that they're in the know and on board with all of the safety measures and interacting with the site if they ever need to. So that covers, I guess, both those last two bullets. So next slide, please. With regards to impacts, this just covers a few of the categories. So the first one, these are self-contained and relatively benign facilities. They only occupy the land on which they sit on. There's no emissions. The only material impact is on the land where it resides. There's no perceivable sound or vibration impacts, no air or water pollution. And then any sound that is emitted is just emitted from the project's inverters. Those are usually kind of centrally located within the array. So any sound that is emitted, it's gonna be buffered by all of the other project components as you move out towards the perimeter, but also the sound that comes from them is less than the most stringent noise standards in the OARs for industrial or commercial facilities. With regards to farming and forest activities, it is compatible with agricultural operations. This isn't the first project that has been proposed. I believe there's at least one or maybe two others in Douglas County like this that have been approved, and many others throughout the state. There's no reciprocal negative impacts from the project on farming or really farming on the project. And even if there were negative impacts from farm activities on the project, like Ms. Hawley already mentioned, one of the conditions would be a deed restriction, and we regularly encounter those and sign and abide by them on other projects as well. So that's not for other landowners in the surrounding area, they don't have to worry about like there being a claim from us for dust or something like that. Solar panels, they're made of non-toxic materials, so the main constituent or material in a solar panel is silicon. That's the second most abundant element on Earth. The other materials are aluminum, copper, glass. About 75% of the weight of a solar panel is just glass on the front and back of it. And so these are materials that are commonplace now in our daily lives. Really, our phones probably have more, a larger variety of materials and a larger variety of materials and chemicals in them, and we carry them around in our pockets and hold them up to our heads every day. We're not even really approaching that with this type of facility. They don't erode. All of the components are encapsulated and self-contained, so there's no like concern or risk of leaching or anything like that. With regards to safety, I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but the project's gonna be constructed and built under all of the relevant building and electrical codes. There's gonna be standard lockout measures and safety warnings posted for a facility like this, and is surrounded by perimeter fencing to help prevent vandalism or trespassing. With regards to traffic, there's really only any like noticeable traffic during the construction phase when it's being built. Like I mentioned, that's relatively short time period, 3 to 6 months. Once they're up and operating, they're considered unmanned facilities. So you might have a pickup truck going out there maybe 3 or 4 times a year to either check on equipment or implement the weed mitigation plan. So it's very minimal, no substantial or material increase to traffic in the area once it's built. And then with regards to glare, so it's a solar array. It's designed to absorb light, not reflect it. And modern panels only reflect about 2% of light, which is similar to the reflection that you get on other natural materials all around us. And I guess one other thing, the picture here is showing sheep grazing around projects. That could very well happen on a project like this, and it's in the FG zone, so farm grazing, it's a permitted use subject to conditions. It could still even be used for grazing after the project is installed, which would be consistent with the use or the zone. Next slide, please. With regards to local benefits, so there's a job benefit. During construction, there's gonna be about 45 individuals that are employed to build this. Oftentimes, those are hired out local subcontractors and laborers. So there's a economic benefit from that for the local community and the county. It's adding a source or an asset for distributed power for local grid resiliency. So this is basically helping to further diversify the fuel mix and the supply sources on the electricity grid. And then in terms of local investment and economic development, to construct it, it's gonna be a little bit more than $5 million to put this together. So that's a clear economic development figure to consider. And then also for the landowner, they're getting a long-term lease, And that lease revenue is money that is gonna be put in their pocket. They live in the community, they live in Winston. And so that's an added benefit to the community there in terms of increased economic opportunity. Next slide, please. So just to end with kind of a broad brush overview of the applicable land use criteria, Ms. Holly already covered a lot of this. But the OARs for these facilities, they're really trying to strike a balance between, I guess, two values of preserving farmland while also encouraging new sources of renewable energy. And so that's why we have the 12 acres acreage safe harbor to allow it, but put a cap on it so that we can't have hundreds or thousands of acre sites going in places where we have high value soils, where it's high value agricultural land. We have to use the least suitable lands, so I think it was 2020 or 2021, the land use rules changed to disallow the proposed siting of these on class 1 or 2 soils. We can only be on class 3 and above. And that was, in furtherance of trying to preserve the most high value farmland. The production on the balance of the property has to be able to continue. We can't negatively impact agricultural operations on other portions of the property or neighboring properties. Like Ms. Holly already mentioned, we can't result in negative or unnecessary soil compaction or erosion. And for sites that are over 48 acres, that's when the consideration has to be made on whether it materially alters the stability of the overall land use pattern in the area, and we're way below that at 12 acres or 11. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are just some summary points. Already said a lot of this. So yeah, would you like to close it out?
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so I mean, I think that was a pretty comprehensive rundown. We won't take up much more of your time at this point. There's not really a lot more for me to add. I will note, I think kind of the intent of putting together this presentation as well as the evidence that we submitted previous to this hearing is to address the concerns in the comments. Certainly we expect there will be concerns, but we truly are trying to be a transparent party here. We're trying to be a partner with the community. To the extent we can, we have offered optional mitigation. And I think that's kind of all I'm gonna say about that at this point. But thank you for your time, and be happy to answer any questions if you want to right now, or we can save them for rebuttal.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Okay, do we have anyone else in favor that wants to speak? We had a couple letters that came in, but I don't think those folks are here. So if there's no one else in favor, we'll start with the neutral party with ODFW. If she wants to say anything at this point, or are you just still here for informational? Could you maybe come forward and speak a little bit on the wetlands?
I was just considering, sorry. Oh, actually, listen, I just have a question actually for the applicant. but-
Come up and state your name and
Okay.
the whole works. You're here.
I know. My name is Amy Dar. I'm the regional habitat biologist for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I submit the letters for these various proposals at county level planning. And I just had a question actually that came up while you were talking. You mentioned the timing at which people visit. Does the landowner typically have a way to access the enclosed space? I'm just thinking in the context of the one condition that talks about fencing. And any circumstances where game mammals may become entrapped due for some random reason.
Right.
What's the feasibility of response time
Yeah.
of those that visit and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think,
Our elk can jump.
Oh, I know, just keep your comments, you'll have your opportunity.
yeah, I guess within our lease, there's a clear property right for us as the tenant, and we haven't really ever addressed the situation where a landowner would want to enter the project site. I think in this instance, it would make the most sense to have some sort of procedure in place with DFW to be the party that addresses a scenario like that if it should ever happen. But I guess if DFW prefers that the landowner do something, then I'm not necessarily opposed to that either. It's just when it comes to operating the site, it's a capital intensive project. We can't just let anyone go in. Banks and lenders don't they wanna see everything be tight and locked down. So yeah, I think that's a valid concern though. Sure, there's a way to help the best approach to that.
So I guess it's just a great way to highlight, kind of as I expressed in my letter, it's kind of at the end, the bulk of my letter is about the wetland. But ODFW does have a siting policy and guidance document that was provided, and our typical policy is early consultation, and so little bits like that can usually be worked out early on in the process, when that does occur. And so just kind of wanted to highlight that component, both to the planning committee as these may be future proposals for the county, but also it is in our interest to work with applicants in solar facilities.
That's very much appreciated, thank you for the comments, Ms. Starr. I think one thing I will note, just kind of in response to that too, is if I'm not mistaken, the design did change after the meeting from the traditional fence to this wooden fence. So this fence wasn't necessarily on the table at the beginning of the application. For us to consult with ODFW on that, so we didn't know the design was gonna change until we heard feedback. But valid concern nonetheless, and I think we can certainly work something out. Thank you.
Yeah, staff had a,
I just want to provide a clarification that might help some of the questions that Ms. Starr had, and also for the applicant, that the way we worded the condition number 9, the proposed condition, in case the wooden fence didn't work, that you have some alternatives, and that might be working with Fish and Wildlife to come up with an alternative that might work. So it says that coordinate with ODF&W for the installation of appropriate security fencing around the perimeter of the solar facility that provides the visual screening, which would be kind of like the wooden fence, but also mitigates against adverse impacts that may impact wildlife. So maybe there's a way to design the fence so that, there is some way for game to still use it too. So we left that kind of open so that there is a fence we want to try the balance between visual impacts being mitigated, but also limiting the impacts to wildlife. So, and that's what I think their guide that Fish and Wildlife has in their letter was what talked about some of that.
For the record, we have no issue with condition 9.
Amy, I had a quick question, as far as the wetlands, do you see this being the current design affecting the wetlands, or?
My understanding from that diagram, and I think I called while I was writing my letter to get clarification too, was that they had already planned in the required buffer. Is that correct? So, and then what I'm not entirely sure, but maybe they can clarify, was I did have a bullet point about also buffering for any fence maintenance needs that I can't remember on your diagram on whether that was like a minimum distance from the wetland, or is there room for that you
Yeah, there
could do your
wasn't,
required
there
maintenance
wasn't a measured
without
distance
affecting
between
that?
the fence and the mapped wetland. Like visually, it appears that there is sufficient space, but I guess we can either either show that distance or confirm it.
I think condition 8 as well kind of talks about interfacing with you guys in terms of any impacts to the wetland. Again, I think we're outside of the buffer zone. Your question was primarily a buffer for wildlife though. Could you rephrase the question a little bit?
For fence maintenance,
Yes.
because usually that also entails a footprint of clearance, in which case that may still infringe into the wetland depending on needs. And so, cause usually those buffers are in relation to structures, and not necessarily like the pathways and clearances of vegetation that may be beneficial to the wetland ends.
Yeah.
There's a scale legend.
Yeah. I guess from my experience in working with Department of State Lands and on a project that also had DFW submit comment, the main concern there was with regards to long-term impacts from removal of fill in the wetland. And if there are long-term impacts from removal or fill in the wetland, then we either get a wetland permit and have mitigation measures or provide compensatory mitigation. So I've been through that process and I know that we can meet those requirements. With regards to like any temporary activity in the wetland, I don't know. This is more of a legal question. If there is a legal statute that prohibits or restricts temporary non-fill or non-removal type activities within a wetland that don't have long-term negative impact.
So with regard to the DSL question, if they were doing removal fill, that is another,
That's condition 8, yeah, that's, yeah.
just kind of migrating with the thing. Is another scenario where we do have opportunities with DSL to provide comments to DSL as well. And so that would be another opportunity to engage.
I think the baseline here is that it's our position, we are not impacting the wetland, we've adequately buffered the wetland, I think that's depicted on the site plan. To the extent that fence maintenance activities do result in some sort of impact to the wetland, we'll obviously address that through condition 8, which requires consultation with both you and DSL. If for some reason there is an impact of the wetland that would result in removal fill, that would require a DSL permit, and again, that's a condition to obtain that permit, and frankly, it's against state law to do that sort of activity without the permit, so.
Unless it's under 50 cubic yards.
Yes.
Right, but they consider they consider the volume of all of the above ground material towards that fill threshold, so even if what we put in the ground is less than 50 cubic yards, we will still have to get that's their position on that. So yeah, we will check the box with them, they will check.
Alright, thank you, Amy. Okay, we'll go to the opposed, Frank Elias. Scott, if you wanna come forward, we'll start with you. So Frank? Yep, come on up, Frank. Again, you can state your name and your address, and we've got about 6 of us tonight, so I'm gonna start with like a 4-minute time limit. That should leave everyone plenty of time we don't have a huge turnout. If you can, though, as you come up, try not to repeat the same things over and over again. Try to bring up new information if you can. If you agree with what's already been said, you can just say you agree with some of that stuff. Be brief with it to kind of maximize that time. So we'll kind of shoot for 4 minutes and just look to me, Frank, and I'll kind of tell you if you don't get to the end by then. Okay? Just state your name and address, sir.
Hi, my name's Frank D. Elias, and my address is 1754 Glenbrook Loop. And I'll be right next to the project on the back. Property's right there. Anyway, I've been here for 52 years now. And anyway, I definitely know that when it comes to selling the property, I won't be able to get what I want. fence to look at all the time. And anyway, I've been talking to everybody out there, and nobody's in favor of it at all. And there's always about 17, I'd say about 17 elk right there on my property almost all the time in the wintertime. Never during hunting season.
Of course not.
Anyway, I'm completely against it, I know that. Our property will depreciate. Nobody's going to look at a wooden fence or fence out there. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Okay.
All right, so Jennifer Hammond, and you're gonna be speaking on behalf of Steve Henrik. And state your name and address.
I'm Jennifer Hammond. I live at 461 Shoestring. I'm about 130 feet from the proposed, directly across from. Steve Heinrich is the landowner. I've been there for about 30 years. He owned, or not 30 years, 3 years. He's owned the property for 23 years. I also don't know if this is allowed. My neighbors are in Virginia right now and they can't be here, but they're watching live. They live directly right next to me, Jerica and Donovan Sheets, so they kind of sent me some questions too. I don't know if that's allowed, or some comments. And I agree with Frank as well on the, and I know Steve does as well, on the property depreciation, and I know that doesn't go with your guys' application, that's not part of it. However, you know, we're all there because of the land and, you know, we're out in the country away from resources and that kind of stuff, because we do love what we're looking at. I don't believe that any strangers are gonna come in and pay top dollar for the properties if somebody was to wanna sell one of our properties. I've submitted an email and pictures of the elk myself, across the way. That's part of what, you know, is wonderful about living there. We don't wanna be looking at a wooden fence, we don't wanna look at the solar panels. I know they talked about the land needing and being able to be restored after the 20 years. But I also know that was brought up at the last meeting, that there's not been anything long enough for there to be any good, I don't know what the word is I'm thinking of, studies that show that that really actually does happen after 20 years, that that is actually capable. I do understand that's the law. However, this is, you know, all new to everybody, and that we haven't come across that yet, and I believe that was brought up. And I also believe at the last meeting, the 5 to 10% discount is something that the community has to buy into. And I think, I could be wrong, it was a one-time like credit towards your power bill. So those are just some of the big things. I know, I'm a little concerned that they didn't have a lot of really good, clear answers on for the Fish and Wildlife, and I know that there are permits and stuff that they have to follow through with. But basically, I don't believe it's in our best benefit as the neighboring. The landowners don't even live in the community, they live in Winston. So it's not really affecting them except for their pocketbooks, and this is really affecting all of our pocketbooks as well. I know that myself, when I brought this up at the last meeting, I don't do very well public speaking. So the landowner, he is, I would be able to buy the property at some point, and that's something I work really hard on the property and keeping it up and taking care of it for him. And having that as part of my view and part of the affecting the wildlife, because I really do feel like it will, because I mean the whole herd is right in that spot most of the time. I wouldn't want to purchase the land, and that's been my plan for the last 3 to 4 years, and getting this property up to par and getting it clean. So I don't think a stranger would wanna come in. I don't think any of you would probably wanna see that across the street from your homes, especially if you put your time and effort into living out in the country and away from industrial stuff. So thank you for your time. I appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you very much. Amanda Nash.
Hello, my name is Amanda Nash. I am the homeowner at 601 Shoestring Road. in reference to the map, I am the largest landowner for that section that will be affected. When I first heard about this project, I wanted to know what it looked like. To be honest, I had never seen anything this scale before. And so as I was looking through Google and trying to gather information, don't worry, I will not go over my slides, bless you. There are approximately 13 different solar facilities in Oregon currently that match the criteria of what this project has. None of them butt up to a residential area such as ours. And a quick Google search shows that. And I presented my slides at the city meeting and allowed an opportunity for them to rebuttal or correct me if I was wrong. They were not able and were not able to make a comment. I was hoping the slideshow they would have been able to come up with some information if you are putting these in residential areas right in our backyard. But it's just very unfortunate. The land use is there for a reason. It's been there for decades. I myself am a third generation landowner there. And a number of people that are surrounding in this area are the greatest people in Riddle. They are our coaches, our volunteers, our donors, FFA leaders, 4-H leaders, church leaders. I mean, we are a solid group. This is not a desolate neighborhood. This is a high value neighborhood. My side project is I am a real estate agent, and I can say I just have been overwhelmed with concerns about not only what is it going to do, but it is the goal of so many people to make it to Shoestring or Glenbrook. If you want to live in Riddle, it's beautiful. And I just want you to take that into consideration. Does this fit? And has Oregon done this before? And what is this going to do not only for Riddle, but the state? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay, Tom Bixby. I should have let Debbie go first, right, Tom?
Pardon?
I should have let Debbie go first since she was.
You should
I
have.
know.
She's a much better speaker.
You read the stuff.
State your name and address, sir.
Tom Bixby, 664 Metcalf Lane. We're just on the other side of Frank Elias's property, so we're about 500 feet off of the project, and that's our front door. So, and we're to the east, so I'm always concerned about light. I've had macular degeneration for about 34 years, and so the glare scares me, just plain scares me. And I've looked at my own solar panels and yeah, they don't reflect as much light as I thought they might. As that sun comes down, my front door is right there. And we'll see. And that's kind of where I'm at on all of this. I've read through the conditions. And we'll see if the county's conditions work. We'll see if the developer makes them work or can make them work. We'll be watching. And then there was one other thing that I wasn't clear on when I read through the conditions. And on your finding 4, on fragmentation of the existing property. You say you have no impact on that, but.
And Tom, if you would address us, you're addressing the commission, you just ask us and we'll ask those questions. You're talking about the fragmentation, so.
Yeah, fragmentation. And they state that they don't have any impact on that, but the project starts 560 feet north of the south line. So you have this block 550 feet by, how wide is the property? And maybe you've left an aisle along the inside, I don't know, I couldn't tell from the maps. So maybe that's taken care of. about 10 acres is kind of isolated from the rest of the property because of the project. And so that'd be interesting to know. But we'll see on the compaction and the weed abatement, all of the other things. Thank you.
Alright, thanks. Debbie Bixby? I'll do better. Next time I'll have you first, so you don't have to shuffle.
Debbie Bixby, 664 Metcalf Lane, and I will try to be brief because it's been a long evening and the bathroom's quite a ways away. So anyway, we have lived here for almost 40 years. We bought this property because we wanted to be out in the agriculture area, do agriculture. If we wanted to be by commercial activities, we would have bought in town and stuff. So there's a whole lot of course, personal and emotional appeal there that we're worried about, very worried about. The information that, when we looked at what Amanda had dug up about the sites around Oregon that have these facilities, the preponderance of them have the owners are right there. So that kind of bothers me that that's not the case this time. And we're the closest that, you know, those ones in other spots in Oregon, the distance between the residences and the facility are much larger than right across the street. The street is the size of this room and those houses are right there. That's disturbing. That's very disturbing. And so there's something wrong with land use planning. The owners should be required to live right where they're foisting this stuff on someone else. And that's a flaw in our system, I think. Anyway, they should have to put themselves and their loved ones next to, because we all used to think asbestos was a good thing, and that didn't prove to be the case. So it's like an unknown quantity. We're the victims, I guess. And so it's a terrible spot to be sitting in when you're living there and then have to feel like it's gone out of your control. And so anyway, as a voting citizen and a member of the community, there's a whole lot more than just business that needs to go on around here. There's people's lives, and so that's it. I'm heading for the bathroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeannie Swanson? Or Janelle Swanson?
Janelle Swanson, 707. Janelle Swanson, 707 Shoestring Road. I do live on Shoestring. I live a little bit far above where the project will be going in. I moved out there because it's quiet, it's beautiful, and I just enjoy the peace and quiet. And I'm behind everybody else of opposing this. Thank you.
I believe I got everyone that was opposed. Jeff, did that touch everyone? If I did not, speak now. I wanna give everyone an opportunity. Alright, so that covers all those opposed. So now, if the applicant would like to come give a rebuttal.
Okay, again, for the record, Keenan Norton Battalion, Schwabi, on behalf of the applicant here, Shoestring. First, just wanted to say I really appreciate the public's comments tonight. I know it's not easy to come out this late at night and give testimony. It's an important part of our civic duty. I truly appreciate that. We may disagree with the comments, but they're important nonetheless, so thank you. So in terms of just kind of some of the themes that were raised here, I think the first one I'm gonna hit is property values. I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, that's not an approval criteria. It's understood. It's arguable whether or not this will actually impact property values in the area. If this property was to sell because it is increased in value with the development, that would be a very valuable comp for the area, but again, it's not an approval criteria, so it's kind of outside the scope of this. In terms of restoring the site, we have a condition of approval as recommended by staff, which we will accept, that will bind us to restore the site. So I think there's really nothing more we can do to that. We'd be in breach of our land use approval if we did not comply with that condition at the termination of the facility.
The lease also, that's a requirement of our lease with the landowner as well.
I guess in terms of distance to residential areas, I will note that there are solar projects of a similar nature developed in Oregon City and Salem, both of which are much more highly dense residential areas than the subject property. We're complying with all required setbacks, so from a land use, from the Ludo, we are in compliance with all those requirements, so there's really not much more we can do in terms of site location. And that kind of brings me to the other point, fragmentation. The site design, I mean, Jonathan can certainly speak to this, was very intentionally selected. The property is south of the high value farmland, because again, we cannot develop on the high value farmland, and it is north of a steep slope and a forest. So we chose that site because that is the area that would result in the least amount of environmental impact. So there really was nowhere else to put it. I also disagree with the fragmentation argument in general, because if you look at the site plan, it does not clearly fragment the property. We're talking about 11 acres of 130. So there's 119 more acres that are still gonna be obviously usable. In terms of reflection of light, I understand light sensitivity. I think that I also heard from the commenter that they don't reflect as much light as he necessarily thought. Solar panels reflect about 2% of light. Their intent is to absorb the light. It'd be kind of counterproductive if they were reflecting light, because the whole point is to absorb the light to generate the electricity. In addition, that was the whole intent of proposing the fence, was to mitigate any sort of visual impacts for the property. Again, outside the approval criteria is something that we offered to try and further mitigate those impacts. Let's see. Other than that, I guess in terms of the ODF&W concerns, we certainly will take those to heart. We have the May 30th letter here. Neither site or fence maintenance or wildlife being trapped inside of the fence was necessarily raised in their letters, so this is the first time we heard those concerns tonight. Again, I think just in our discussions there, we do have a plan in place to address those if those do become a problem. But I think that was really, that kind of caught us off guard a little bit. But nonetheless, valid concerns, we'll certainly address them. Is there anything else you want to add? Okay, other than that, I guess, just kind of turning to process here. Again, we respect the public's concerns. They do not address the approval criteria. However, we believe that we are in compliance with all the approval criteria. We respectfully request the application be approved. In addition, based on the staff report, the substantial evidence we've submitted, we're prepared to waive final argument if you guys are interested in reaching a decision today, which we would encourage. So, thank you very much, and if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Sure.
How big is the fence that you guys, how tall is the fence that you're proposing?
7 feet.
And then a total side subject, but the 5 to 10% reduction in the home value, is there a buy-in to be part of that program?
It's not a buy-in, it's an opt-in bill credit program, so if customers want to participate in the community solar program, it's basically a way for people that either don't wanna put solar on the roof or can't put solar on the roof, they can still get access to solar power. And so they opt into the program. It's up to if they want to, they can do it for 20 years, where basically every single month the utility looks at what's their allocated share of the project capacity, and they credit that towards their bill. And then the customer's still gonna be paying their bill as they normally would, but for those credits, they'll get a 5 to 10% discount off the face value of the credits. So for that portion, for like the solar portion of their utility bill, they're saving 5 to 10%.
And is that portion of the solar a higher rate than the standard utility rate currently, do you know?
it's less, yeah.
And then how big is that community range? Is it just within a mile? Is it Riddle? Is it-
Anyone within Pacific Course service territory.
So it can be anybody in Roseburg even.
Yeah, and actually, something we haven't mentioned yet, for this project, it would be slotted into a bucket of capacity in the program that requires it to have additional social benefits. And so for this, in order for it to qualify for that, we would be either partnering with a local Native American tribe, a nonprofit, or local or city government, to basically have a role in the project and to help, I guess, increase the benefits to the local community from its existence.
One other point to add here, just kind of in that discussion, kind of jogged my memory a little bit. I think again, like I noted in the beginning of this presentation, the intent here is to be a community partner. The intent again is for the power to stay local within Douglas County. This is a community-based project. And on the local point, this did remind me, I do wanna make sure I thoroughly address all the public comments. There was concern about the landowner not residing on the property. Ultimately, again, that's not an approval criteria. We can't control where the landowner lives. And counterpoint to that is I think that landowner is also entitled to make full and beneficial use of their property. And they see an opportunity to diversify their operation here. And again, this is a local project, so in a way they are giving back to the community. So understand the concern, but again, not really subject to this application.
I had a question regarding health risks, solar panels. I think we've, one of the ladies mentioned, asbestos back when it was invented. It was the coolest thing since sliced bread, and then years later, we find out, you're gonna get lung cancer, what have you from it, so taboo on that. We've heard, I've heard, I think we've all heard, living underneath the big transmission lines could be a beneficial health risk. Have there been any studies come out? I mean, they haven't been out for long enough time, I would think, to even really figure out what long-term health benefits, but I worry about that, people living in close, in proximity to these facilities. Is there any health risk to that?
Yeah, so in terms of health risks, I guess solar is not necessarily, it's not as new as we think it is. Some of the first solar arrays were being put in the 70s. That's kind of when the technology first came out and came onto the market. So it's been around for a long time. Like I mentioned earlier, the materials that make up the facility, so the big one is the solar panels. You have semiconductors, silicon-based semiconductors sandwiched in glass, sealed from the weather, and aluminum and copper. Like, these are all very commonplace materials that are already in our lives. There's no hazardous material permitting that's associated with these facilities just because there are no hazardous materials that are involved. And yeah, I guess I haven't seen any studies that show that there are any significant negative health impacts from them. Because I don't think that there are. There were a couple fact sheets that we submitted into the record also. One of them covers just overall safety with regards to like what are these things made out of. That has information regarding all of the materials being contained within the units that they're manufactured in, and also none of it being toxic or having health impacts. Then the other one was with regards to disposal and recycling. So as some of these facilities are getting older, longer in their years, some companies are springing up to now recycle some of the materials, and in some cases up to like 90% of the materials, either putting them back into the solar industry, so like having a more closed loop type manufacturing process, or repurposing them for other material commodity type uses in industry.
I could follow up a little bit more here. So in one of the pictures in your PowerPoint, you showed like a herd of sheep grazing amongst the panels. then later on you said you lock them down, you don't allow that, or that's not part of your lease agreement or something, so I was a little confused there because you're showing it is an allowable practice, but now we're not, which is really neither here nor there, but is it harmful for an individual, a human being or an animal to be amongst the panels? Cause I've heard over years, people being out in solar fields and getting nuked like they're in a microwave.
Right, yes.
Is that fact or fiction?
Yeah, fiction.
Okay, good.
Yeah, there is no substantial like EMF that's emitted from the facility, so electromagnetic waves.
So like one of the letters of opposition in here was about a gentleman that flew his ultralight or went over, through the valley out of the Tri-City Airport and was concerned about the thermals would throw off.
I guess with regards to aviation, we get clearance from the FAA for every single project. So from an aviation perspective, they give their stamp of approval. With regards to a thermal pilot, I guess it comes down to his.
It's safe to fly over them is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the pilot's
I mean, it's-
discretion if he
yeah,
wants to fly
it's-
over him,
it's up
right?
to their- it's up to their airmanship.
Sorry, guys.
No, you're good. I will just also note the two fact sheets he referenced were submitted as part of that packet that you guys got tonight and that were submitted to the county yesterday. In terms of the EMF concerns, that was a theme of one of the public comments that was raised. The impacts are negligible, even within the facility, but certainly outside of it. The sheep question, very good question on that. I think the intent there was to show that, these can be cohabitated developments. A lot of solar farms in Oregon, I think I noted that in one of the submittals, are conducive to apiaries, which are, bee colonies. And if we didn't have the fence, which we proposed to visually screen the site due to public concerns, it is arguable that wildlife could be on the property, but because of the site design specifically designed to respond to those concerns, there will not be wildlife in there.
Yeah, and to your point about the conflict of what I said earlier versus the sheep being shown grazing, it comes down to for us like having a clear property right outlined in our lease, and then also appropriate risk allocation between the parties that are involved in the project. So yes, there are some projects that have grazing or they call it agrivoltaics, like some third party comes in and continues to farm around or under the panels. That can all work as long as there's agreements in place and the parties aren't indemnifying each other, and that does happen. In the case that we were talking about earlier with just on occasion a landowner or someone entering the site, that it's typically what we try to avoid, but in this instance, we would obviously figure something out that mitigates the wildlife concern.
How much heat do they put off?
Heat. I guess I can tell you that plants grow better under the solar panels than they do without them, just because of the additional shade. They're dark, they're a black body, so they're designed to like absorb the light, so that will give off some heat. In terms of it being significant or an issue, I would say that I have solar panels on my roof. My family of 5 lives in our house. It's safe enough to have on people's roofs and not be a problem with regards to heat or creating some major heat source that it can cause an issue.
I think also Chair Burke, in terms of the heat impacts, the setbacks hopefully should alleviate any of that concern as well too for off-site impacts.
Yeah, and this is also an open air facility. It's not built on top of another structure, so you have that additional airflow associated with the project.
Commissioner Allen, did you have a question?
I do. So I'm gonna have a question for staff here in a bit, but a piece you can help me with. Solar LLC, I'm sorry, I just said the name wrong.
Shoestring Solar.
Shoestring LLC. How many members are there in that?
It's a 1-member LLC.
Thank you.
I have a series of questions if I could, and they range in topic area.
We're here to answer them.
Fire prevention, so connectivity to the, is that above ground or below ground? How will you?
In Pacificor, it's typically above ground, so next to the power lines, there'd be a series of like 4 or 5 utility poles with Pacificor's switchgear equipment on it.
I don't have an opinion, I have an opinion, but I'm just curious, and
Yeah.
it wasn't specified when we were talking about fire prevention. And then in Douglas County, we, in addition to our rural fires, we have a local wildland fire protection agency, the Douglas Forest Protective Association. I'd be curious if we could, I'd encourage adding them to they will typically respond to ag lands or all wildland fires, and it would include.
Yeah.
So that would be a nice addition to the rural.
So we've got a condition already for Riddle Rural, so I think just in speaking with Jonathan, I think we're okay with adding them to that list as a proposed condition. And
Got their
then,
name wrong, it's Riddle Fire Protection District. So
Okay.
do your duty on
That-
that.
and so in addition to that, we also developed the fire prevention plan, and we're committed to working with any and all applicable agencies to prevent fire danger.
Then, I appreciate the attempt and efforts you've gone to be transparent. I heard, in my language, what I heard a lot of was about compatibility, just concerns over compatibility and adjacency to residences. And I would benefit from understanding kind of your how did you filter down to this of 130 acres, how did you land on these 11? In an attempt to also, I understand it's not a criteria of approval, but just in your ability to be transparent and working with the community on how that compatibility fit in, if
So
that's.
Jonathan, I'm gonna go real quickly and then I'll turn it over to you.
That's
I think, I brought it up earlier just to jog the memory here. The reason we chose that specific area of the 130 acres is because of the high value farmland to the north, which we're prohibited from developing on, as well as the sensitive areas, I wouldn't call them critical areas, but the steep slope and the trees to the south. And then after that, I'll turn it over to you for any
Yeah.
considerations there.
I appreciate that, so
Yeah.
it's fair to say those kind of take precedent or priority over any other consideration that you or the landowner may have on where we.
Other than photovoltaic lines, we're kind of prevented legally from developing to the north and the high value. I don't know from a design perspective if it would be feasible to develop the project on the steep slopes.
Yeah, so the area to the south is a north facing slope.
Okay, so that doesn't work.
And it's also forested, so we didn't wanna like go out there and clear forest.
There's a mill right down the road.
We're in Douglas County, yes, that is true.
Yeah, there's a big giant tree still in the field that we're choosing to leave there. Cause I felt that was important, so. Yeah, but what Keenan mentioned, it comes down to what soils are on the property, what soils can we or can we not be on, where are the wetlands, let's try to avoid those. And then other constraints like slope and topography.
And again, we are talking about 11 acres here,
I
yeah, no, I know, I'm just reiterating for everyone.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your responses.
Absolutely, thank you for the
And
question.
at this point too, this will be your final opportunity to speak unless you wanna keep the record open moving down the road, so.
No one's requested it, I mean, we're good waiving final argument.
Alright, just wanted to clarify that. Okay,
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Berg.
Okay, at this point, I'm gonna close the public portion and we'll deliberate to a decision. Okay. Yeah,
So when I look at some of these, they're talking about like requiring a bond and such. That's typically gonna be on the LLC itself. But I know many times, and they even mentioned like for a loan for the finances, there's gonna be a personal guarantee. Is there an opportunity to add something like that to these so that it's not just the LLC, but that there's a personal guarantee also?
I know a lot of it is imposed because a lot of the criteria in the OIR requires a lot of that consideration, that we can consider that as a county. And so and other jurisdictions have done similar type things, so and so I don't know about the broadening of that to the, cause it talks usually about the owner of the facility. So I guess that, cause that could change to become Shoestring Solar to somebody else in the future, I guess theoretically, so I guess that's something that at least that could be under consideration about how it's imposed.
And then, you know, depends on if the rest of everyone agrees with me on it. I feel like that puts a little bit more teeth into it, because the company can also just be dissolved and then who's liable?
Respectfully, we'd object to that.
Yeah, we're closed at this point, thank you. This one's a real, I spent some time over the weekend reading this and came really to try to read to get a real idea of this one. This is a tough one, cause I think compatibility, Jacob, you were talking about that compatibility piece and how that fits with the neighboring properties and the existing uses. Must be honest, I struggle with on this one.
So the use for this is very broad though, isn't it? Couldn't they put a mine in there, for instance?
I believe it had several other uses.
So.
What were they, Jeff? I know at some point that had those listed. What are the other uses that were listed for that?
Other conditionally permitted uses in the exclusive farm use zones.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we can speak to that. We typically try to list that to give an idea of what other
Right. I saw it somewhere.
types of things can
It's
be
on
golf,
page 8.
golf courses, Lisa can read it if you.
Yeah, in theory, there's commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, operations for the mining or processing of geothermal aggregate and mineral resources, private parks, playgrounds, campgrounds, hunting and fishing preserves, public parks, community centers, golf courses, personal use airports, home occupations, facilities for the primary processing of forest products, solid waste disposal sites, commercial dog kennel facilities, hardship dwellings, composting facilities, public and private schools, and equine and equine affiliated therapeutic and counseling activities. Those are just some examples.
No, thank you.
Point being
I
that
still just struggle with
it is a challenge when you're out there, cause you don't know what your neighbor's gonna do, or a new neighbor, or it's one of the challenges of being on
It's a commercial
those
facility
areas.
though. I mean, it's a commercial facility. I guess that's where I struggle with it.
Well, I mean, how different is that from,
No,
I mean, it
I
says
get it.
commercial
I
activities
get
right
it
there.
with the mining.
One thing that has been brought up is how close it is to residential areas. And if you ever drive through Christmas Valley, they have a huge solar farm right next to neighborhoods, right next to houses, out in Christmas Valley. I drive past 1,300-foot long panels every day going to work, on my driveway. Tri-City water put in for the local area there, and I've never had, I mean, it's not next door, but I look at it every single day. So I haven't had any glare issues or anything off those. And then you're raised above them.
No, I get it. It's a tough one. I just look at it compatibility wise. How does it fit with the existing uses that are there and the compatibility? And I think the wetlands close by, I think the elk frequenting that area, I just think there's a compatibility issue, and this really stems out of that. But that's just my personal take on it.
They put, I mean, there's with the compatibility though, they've gotta meet ODF. They've got 8 and 9 there. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot of 13, 14 conditions, yeah, 14 conditions.
And here again, you're talking 11 out of 130 plus acres, so it's not like you're talking a big huge swath of land.
The one thing that on the conditional uses number 7, the fire department, kind of to your point with EFPA, with as a lot of the community members have said, they disapprove it, no one that they talk to approve of it. Riddle is a very small community with a volunteer fire department. So if the small community and volunteer fire department's the one, they can hold up the thing by saying they're not satisfied, even if they meet all the requirements and check the box, they could still say they're not satisfied too.
thinking, Jacob?
I think we have to make a motion.
Yeah.
We've had healthy dialogue and conversation. So I would move to accept alternative one. The 14 listed conditions, I would, with a couple of amendments to those. In item 7, I would correct the name of the Riddle Fire District Department and include the Douglas Forest Protective Association. Douglas Forest Protective Association is the new source.
Is that the only change?
That's the only change.
Okay, so I have a motion with the add of DFPA to number 7. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Michael, you got any more input or? No? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, I will be nay. And, okay, alright, motion passes.
So again, I'll note for the record that the summary of this meeting, findings of fact will be put together, and before the planning commission, once those are signed, those will be mailed out to all parties, and then that will start the appeal period. There is an opportunity for appeal. An appeal of the planning commission decision would go at the next level here locally before the board of commissioners. And that would be the next steps for this process.
Okay. Alright, on to our next item. Do we have any business from the audience? Okay, no business from the audience, business from the planning commission. You guys got anything?
Happy belated birthday, Jeff.
Oh, thank you.
You don't wanna hear us sing happy birthday.
Oh, no, I heard it a few times, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, if we have no business from the planning commission, business for the planning department. Jeff, what do you got for us?
We actually did not receive any new items for September, so we'll just be focusing on the sets of findings from this evening.
Alright, what's the next date?
19th maybe? No.
It is 19th.
Yeah, it won't be far.
That's the third Thursday.
Yeah, and I appreciate everybody, this is a off-schedule meeting, but it was tough to get everyone here, and I do appreciate everyone making this meeting, because we were trying to get last month's items and then a new one, and so I appreciate that.
Okay, if anyone doesn't have anything else, we'll adjourn the meeting, adjourned.